Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today, February 24th of 2022. And I'm speaking with you today about an issue that we've been talking about for a year, about the international policy of the United States and how it is affecting the rest of the world. In particular, let's focus on what's happening in Russia. Let's look at what's happening with Ukraine. Let's look at what's going to be happening to our allies in Europe. But at the same time, let's not forget that this is affecting the Iran nuclear deal. That's affecting North Korea and its hypersonic missiles. It's affecting China and its desire to take over Taiwan. It's putting fear in our allies in South Korea and Japan. This is not limited to just the United States. It's not limited to just Russia versus Ukraine. And because it isn't just limited to that small region, and because of what that region means, it affects everyone in the world. So we want to talk about that with you. Now, we're trying to find the clarity in the propaganda. And so we're going to be going through a few different things so that you have a better understanding of exactly what is happening in the fog of war. We hope that you'll stay with us throughout the entire video to understand. But if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and we thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And of course, every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow. We take your tweets, your calls, your chats from anywhere in the world to talk to you about the issues that matter and how it affects you. And we do that because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to free speech. Whether your government agrees, whether or not the internet overlords agree, we reach out and want to hear your voice every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to tell us what you think about these issues. We hope that you will join us this Sunday. So let me try and make this as clear as I can because there's so much that's going on. And there's no way that when you're looking at the news every night, there's no way in a minute and a half, not even in a 5-minute segment in the news media, are you able to capture all the things that are going on and what caused them to go on. Because that's important. Because what caused this situation with Russia and Ukraine is what's influencing what's happening in North Korea, Iran, and China, as well as around the world. These things are connected and they do have an impact to you. Now, we've made great effort for well over a year to talk about the international policy of the Biden-Harris administration, or rather we should say the lack of policy, the lack of an international directive, any kind of goal, any kind of plan from the Biden-Harris administration. It's been scattershot, and we've covered it in many articles and issues, and we've covered it in the many different ways, in the many different aspects that this is taken. So we want you to understand this because it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. It's going to affect Americans in their pockets. It's going to affect Americans abroad. And it's going to destabilize the world. It already is. Let me try and explain what I mean. You see, once bullets start flying, especially from one of the major countries in the world, which Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and of course the US, major country. When bullets start flying, propaganda follows it. And there is always a spin in the news media to try and promote a certain ideology. And again, this is about the 2022 midterm elections. This has always been about the 2022 midterm elections for the Biden-Harris administration. And that's part of the reason why Putin has taken advantage of this. It's one of the key factors that allowed him to move forward in the way that he has. And why do I say that? How can I show that? Look at the propaganda we're seeing. This is from CBS News, and they reported on how the Ukraine crisis is already hitting Americans' wallets on February 22nd of 2022. This is a lie. This is purely propaganda. It's propaganda you would see on NBC or MSNBC or CNN. It's not real. You see, they say the U.S. economy has been hit with increased gas prices, inflation, and supply chain issues due to the Ukraine crisis. That's just not true. It's never been true. The United States inflation, which is up 7.5%, well before there were any troops on the border of the Ukraine and Russia, that's got nothing to do with it. You see, you can go back in time, and we've been covering it all through the year, showing you and telling you. Matter of fact, it was February of 2021 when we told you that the second half of 2021 that the U.S. economy would fall apart. It was that easy to predict, and it had nothing to do with the international politics of Vladimir Putin. It had everything to do with the economic policies of the Biden administration. Very simply, on January 21st, when Joe Biden shut down the XL pipeline with Canada, U.S. energy prices went up, and they've continued to go higher since as he shut down natural gas fracking. Whether you agree with it or not is not relevant. The fact is that when you shut down all the 11,000 jobs just on the XL pipeline and all the jobs that are associated with it, when you stop fracking and disencourage fracking in the United States, when you stop the United States from being a net exporter of natural gas and oil and turn it into a net importer of those same energy products, that affects energy prices. The cost of energy in the United States was up 40% for the average American citizen. 40%. Well before Russia taking one foot into the Ukraine. That is a fact. It is undisputable. These are numbers and records coming from the United States government itself, as we have shown you over several months. But the reason why CBS News is coming out and they're putting this information out for you is for the 2022 election. It's to give cover and shade for the Biden-Harris administration and their failures. It's so that you will blame Vladimir Putin and not Joe Biden or Kamala Harris for their failures. It's kind of sad when you think about it, because it's not true. How can I say this? We have believed on this channel that the lack of international policy is one of the leading reasons why the global stability has fallen under the Biden-Harris administration. That we have seen every time that Kamala Harris has gone out and tried to do diplomacy for the United States, it has failed in embarrassment and has actually made our relations with our allies weaker and strengthened our enemies over and over again, whether it's in South Korea, whether it's on the southern border, her recent speech over about what happens in Russia. She's just failed in every single step. But Biden has done no better. We've seen him for 3 months. We've seen him since December say over and over again that sanctions would protect the Ukraine, that he was trying to stop Putin, that he was in massive negotiations with Putin, and they failed. Remember, he said to the United States that Putin feared him, that his relationship with Vladimir Putin from his days as vice president under Barack Obama would be a net asset, and that he was strong enough to stand up to Putin. And yet, in every single example, we have seen Putin literally laugh in the face of Joe Biden throughout 2021 and now in 2022. That is a fact. And that's the problem. There is no fear. There is no stick to go with any carrots that the Biden-Harris administration may provide. And no one has any respect because there is no stick, there is no carrot, and there is no competency. And that's what's making these things worse, and why we believe this is the start of a cycle of problems, not the cycle, the problem, or the issue that has to be resolved. And it's not World War III, as we have explained on this channel before, but it may be 3 regional problems. These are big issues. You can't get the answer in a minute and a half. You can't get the answer in 5 minutes. Anyone who tells you that, anyone who tries to suggest that, is lying to you. They're omitting a lot of information, kind of like CBS. Why is this important? Because we're seeing the propaganda. The bullets have started flying, the propaganda is flowing, and the real story is somewhere in the middle. Now, what you may see is, and this is something we've been receiving from several people who are part of the audience, and they made us aware of this alleged video of supposed to be their Russian soldiers captured by the Ukraine. And these soldiers allegedly are stating that they were on a training mission. They weren't aware they were going to the Ukraine, that they didn't know what was going on. Well, that doesn't seem to make any sense. Training exercises don't include live ammunition because it demoralizes your military if Bob just got shot in a training exercise because you were given live rounds. Here's the biggest way that I know that there's something wrong with this message. The 11th Guard Air Assault Brigade were told to go and shoot people. If you're there to shoot people, that's not a training exercise. You have live rounds and you're told to shoot someone. I mean, I want that to sink in. This isn't real. Now, do I expect a low-level soldier to understand the deep plans of Vladimir Putin and his cabinet? No. Do I expect him to even understand squad-level tactics? No. So the information they're providing is questionable at best, and the fact that we don't know who they are and we don't have an official translation makes us question that altogether. And you should, because questions are important when there is violence going on, when the situation is chaotic and hard to keep up with. That's why we took a couple of days in covering this story. We're trying to make sure we get as much proper information, verifiable, reproducible information to try and give you more perspective so that you can then plan and understand the consequences and what to do about them. So there seems to be this message going out that Putin is somehow, he's paranoid now. He's not in touch with his mind, that he has lost his mind, that he's become crazy. The Ukraine crisis exposes Putin's isolated paranoia in the world. Really? Does it? Because Putin, well, yes, he's, I'm sure, somewhat paranoid. There is an active war going on. Every world leader is, to some extent, isolated and paranoid. That's why they have guards and security. And when there's a war and they become an assassination target, well, that paranoia, that isolation increases everywhere in the world. That is true. In fact, in the United States, Joe Biden's security detail increased the moment that Russia actually went into an active war. That doesn't make him paranoid. That's normal procedure. But the fact that France is putting out this message that Putin is isolated and paranoid is important because it's trying to give you an idea of how evil he is, how wrong he is in what he did. I'm not disputing that Vladimir Putin is wrong for invading the Ukraine on many levels, but I'm also understanding that there's a manipulation that's going on. And so I have to take that with a grain of salt. Because if we accept that Putin is just evil and Russia is just evil, the next thing that follows that is, and we can do anything to them. This is the whole mindset of Antifa. They say that anyone who doesn't think like them are fascists, and therefore they can use violence against those people because they're the good guys. That's what Antifa thinks. That's what members, I've spoken with many members of Antifa over and over again, and that's their mindset. They're justified in using violence because they're good, and the other people are bad and evil, and so they have to defeat them, and using violence is okay. That's what Antifa says. There is no difference between that mindset and what we see in the propaganda that's being built up against Russia right now. And that can lead to a dangerous place. It leads to an escalation of violence. It leads to more people being harmed, and it doesn't necessarily lead to more freedom. And all of this isn't just affecting Russia and Ukraine, as I said, because we see China, February 23rd, yesterday. China says the U.S. is creating fear and panic over the Ukraine. China is taking the side of Russia. China is looking at this and putting the United States in the doghouse, saying it's the failure of the United States, the push from the United States to drive NATO into an overdrive, to try and make all of Europe rabid about this internal conflict between the Ukraine and Russia, and that has escalated, thus endangering everyone in the world. Of course, China is also looking at this as a way to excuse their own desires for Taiwan. And if everyone's upset with what's happened because of the failure of diplomacy and negotiations of the United States and the United Kingdom and France and Germany, well then those same individuals are that much less capable of doing negotiations between China and Taiwan, that much less credible when they try and militarize or try and stop China from taking over Taiwan, as well as in North Korea with Japan and South Korea. And of course, there's the Iran nuclear deal, which is going to be coming out in the next couple of days, which is meant only to back up Joe Biden and to make him seem like he's a strong leader. Let me show you what I mean, because people will say, well, Mike, you just don't understand. Okay, let's see if I do understand. This is Joe Biden. Now, according to C-SPAN, February 24th, he made this announcement earlier today. And I want you to hear how it starts off.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Good afternoon. The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity, this is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along. Okay,
so let's start off with this. In just those, 3 sentences that he said in roughly 10 seconds, you were lied to. You were lied to on several points. The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the Ukrainian people. That's true. Without provocation, depends on whose point of view you're looking at. Without justification, there are many justifications. We see that Putin is doing this and has done this in 2014. He wants the Ukraine because it is the breadbasket of Russia. He wants the Ukraine because of the uranium that it has. He wants it because of its strategic positioning for Europe and to counter NATO, because of historical beliefs of the Russians about the Ukraine, that they should own it. And that, going back to the czars, you can go back over 100 years to see the local regional conflicts there and which region thinks it should be in charge and who has tried to take over this country and that country in that part of the world. So there are justifications, not necessarily from the American point of view, not necessarily from the European point of view, but from the Russian point of view, that exists. And it's in just making that lie, in lying about what justifications are, to lie and to make Russia as evil as possible, there is a backlash to that.
He rejected every good faith effort the United States and our allies and partners made to address our mutual security concerns through dialogue to avoid needless conflict and avert human suffering.
See, there you go. He just rejected it out of hand. No, he came up with counteroffers Nothing that was offered by the United States, what was offered by NATO, by England, France, and Germany, each of these countries working independently and together in negotiations, no one had an offer that's better for Russia than actually owning the Ukraine. So that's not true. And again, he's made them out to be evil. Oh, see, they were always planning to just kill everyone. That's not what they were looking to do. And again, I'm not trying to excuse it, but I'm trying to put this into perspective so that we understand what's going on. For months, the Biden-Harris administration, NATO, have failed. For months, since December. And this is the same administration. This is Joe Biden who said in December that the Ukraine should just give up the regions that are in question right now, that they should just give them away as appeasement. And he has said that repeatedly. He has said that Russia is going to invade. He did say that. He also said that Russia is going to win. He has encouraged Russia for months to take this on and to defeat the Ukraine and blockaded his own negotiations for Secretary Anthony Blinken and himself, that the Ukrainian people are on their own and that, yes, he's more than happy to give them a couple of handguns so that they can fight against fighter jets and tanks. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so this is what he wants us to think, but that's why there's a backlash that's going on right now. There are a lot of people who have been paying attention. Not just the political junkies like myself, but many people who've been paying attention to the details, who have watched that Joe Biden has said to Vladimir Putin, oh, he's a killer. And then when he's in person with Vladimir Putin, he's deferential. And Vladimir Putin has literally laughed in Joe Biden's face. That every bluff that Joe Biden has made, Vladimir Putin has called for over a year, which is why we lead to where we are now. The fact that there is no international policy, and for those who say, Mike, you just don't understand, please detail what is the Biden-Harris administration's international policy. Look at our actions around the world. We have been retreating, threatening sanctions, and basically giving up in every single case. Look at North Korea, look at what the negotiations with the Iran nuclear deal, look at what's happening with Ukraine, Russia, look at what happened with Afghanistan. That's what they've done. That's not a policy, that's running away. That's cowardice, quite honestly. But that's one of the reasons why so many people right now are saying that Biden is a disgrace. It is trending on Twitter as we speak. This is a woman who loves Joe Biden. She goes, well, he's not a disgrace. There's the COVID-19 vaccines, which were created under the Trump administration and denounced by Democrats before they were embraced by them. Standing up to Putin. Putin has been laughing in Joe Biden's face. And nothing that Joe Biden has done, no threat that he has made, has stopped Putin from doing anything that Putin wanted to do, as well as in China, as well as in North Korea, as well as in the Iran nuclear deal. So that's a failure. Ending the pandemic. It hasn't ended. The pandemic continues to exist. People just got fed up with the mask mandates and the vaccine mandates. But it hasn't ended. Bringing respect back to America. Who respects America? Really? Who? Reducing hate crimes. Hate crimes are up. And we have general violence up. That's just, look at the numbers. The violence in 2021 is higher than in 2020 when we had active riots going on across the country and people were locked down. In almost every single state, especially every Democratic state and every Democrat-run city. It's up higher. Violence is up. Whether you want to call it a hate crime or not is meaningless. Creating millions of jobs. He didn't create jobs. He was recapturing the jobs that were shut down because we did a lockdown. In fact, we are behind pace. The population, the number of people who can work, has grown. And we haven't even kept pace with the number of people who lost jobs and businesses because of the lockdowns. So that's a failure. That's why the last unemployment rate went up, not down. Less inflation. Inflation's up 7.45%. It's at a rate the highest in 40, maybe 50 years, and it's increasing, and it's going to keep going. We expect it to hit at least 11% officially, 35% unofficially. That's in your pocket, real world. Real world, you're at 22% increase in inflation right now. Reducing taxes. Taxes are up, and there are more taxes and fees. New York State loves fees. It's easier to explain than taxes because taxes are negative. Fees, no one thinks about. So taxes are up. Passing infrastructure bills, actually Build Back Better, failed. And the American Families Plan has failed. The economy is the example of that. Preventing a war. Well, where? Because war exists. He ended a war. I assume they mean Afghanistan, and abandoned potentially 9,000 Americans in Afghanistan, at least 2,000 that can be tracked at this moment, and he has lied to the American people about the people he has thrown under a bus. So there's a lot of statements here, and there's a lot of misinformation. Now, that propaganda is being used to make sure that Joe Biden is bolstered and that he can take advantage of it, just like what we saw with Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau got emergency powers passed because he wanted to oppose a group of peaceful truckers. Whether you agree with the Freedom Convoy or not, it is a fact that the Freedom Convoy is peaceful. They didn't harm anyone. They were harmed instead. They had people who ran over some of their members. They had police officers laughing about the fact that they had their horses charge and trample people. That's a fact. And people, their businesses were being threatened. People were arrested just for merely walking around with an empty gas can. These things happen. The government stepped in and has stolen people's money, stolen their livelihoods, and labeled them as other, as evil, which allows them to do anything they want to these people. Look at what's happening here with Biden. Isn't that the same thing? If you disagree with what he is doing, you must be an evil other as well, and therefore he can do things against you. Same thing he said to the people who are unvaccinated. You are evil and other, and therefore the government is justified in doing anything it needs to you. That's authoritarianism at its worst, and that's the problem with this propaganda. Because when you don't call it out and when you let it run unchecked, it has escalating problems that get worse and worse. I'll give you an example of one of the questions that were asked by the news
Cecilia
media.
Vega, ABC.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave last night, the threat that he gave, the West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. Number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening.
Okay. First of all, you're the president of the United States. You should be able to recognize if another country is threatening something, an escalation of the war, an escalation of conflict, of violence. You should have a very clear point of view about that, and you should be able to address it, even if it is not clear. Even at the suggestion that Russia could possibly use nuclear weapons, you should be able to say, don't you even think about that. Don't you dare even go near that, because we're the United States and we can take you out. See, that's called diplomacy. That's called negotiation. That's a tactic. Show strength versus strength. Don't you dare. If you want to escalate, we have the ability to counter that escalation. Don't you even think about going to nuclear weapons. Keep this as a conventional war. Why couldn't Joe Biden say that? Why wouldn't Joe Biden say that? Instead of saying, I don't know what could happen. Well, you're the president. Have a plan. You're a commander of military. Have a plan. It doesn't have to be the perfect plan, but have a plan and show strength. Warn them that even if they had it in the back of their heads, that they could possibly, maybe threaten with nukes, stand up and say, throw that idea out the window. No, you can't, because we're the United States and we stand against that. And we can bring as much might, if not more, than you can on this subject. Don't even go there. Shouldn't a leader do that? Try to prevent that escalation? Not to say that necessarily ends the war, but to stop that escalation. So the other question that she asked, which I think is very important, is sanctions have clearly not been enough. But sanctions have been what has been the modus operandi of the Biden-Harris administration. In every single one of his speeches, in all the announcements coming from Secretary of State Blinken, from Joe Biden, and from Kamala Harris, the threat of sanctions has been the biggest thing. If you do this, we will put sanctions on you. If you do this, these will be greater sanctions than anyone has ever seen. It is going to be a landslide of sanctions. He has been saying that for 3 months. And now he wants to tell us, well, sanctions weren't going to stop anything. That was never part of the plan. Just like with Afghanistan, he's rewriting history. He's lying to you. Here's another important question that I think you need to look at.
You're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
Thank you, President Biden. If sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things.
This makes no sense whatsoever. Somehow sanctions are more powerful than bullets and bombs and grenades? Really? Ask the people in Donbass if that's the case. Ask people across the Ukraine right now if that's the case. Because it's not a bulletproof vest. Sanctions don't save people's lives. They don't stop tanks. They don't stop missiles. That's just ridiculous to say that. Although it stops governments in some cases. Seeing the effect of the sanctions are different than what? Are you saying Vladimir Putin can't do math? That his cabinet can't do math? That all of the experts in Russia can't do math? They did the math. They get more food because they have the Ukraine. They get more uranium because they have Ukraine. They get to make more nuclear weapons because they have the Ukraine. They have more strategic positioning because they have the Ukraine. It embarrasses NATO and the United States because they have the Ukraine. There's a lot of reasons here. So to say that, oh, well, the sanctions, feeling the sanctions that they have already had on Russia, that Russia has lived with for decades in many cases, that were existing under the Trump administration that the Biden administration got rid of, they've lived with them. Iran has lived decades. North Korea has lived decades with sanctions imposed every day for decades. Same thing for Russia. And you're telling me that this is somehow going to stop them from being able to do anything they want to do? It's just not realistic. But there are people who are telling you right now that that there is this overwhelming outpouring of people in Russia that are opposed to this. Because again, it's being told to us that Vladimir Putin is now isolated and paranoid. Don't believe this lie that suddenly Vladimir Putin is somehow paranoid. He wasn't paranoid 3 weeks ago. He wasn't paranoid last week. He wasn't paranoid 4 months ago. He's paranoid now? Or is it that you don't like what he's doing now, so you want him to look weak, or at least as best as you can attempt. And we're told that, well, from the Jerusalem Post, Russian police detained thousands in an anti-war pro-Ukrainian protest. So we have these people. There are 40. We're seeing reports somewhere between 40 and, according to The Guardian, 53 cities have had protests. Over 1,700 people have been arrested. Follow me on this. I know I'm going to do some math. But what we've seen generally, and using the U.S. as an example, using the protests here in the United States as an example, for every person that's arrested, generally it's a safe rule to say there's at least 10 people in that crowd. That's normally about the way the numbers work out. About 10% of people are actively seeking to get arrested or do in fact get arrested at a protest versus the total number of people in the crowd. So if we're saying that there's 1,700 people were arrested in 53 cities, that's about 32 people per city, or about 320 people on average that are protesting in 53 cities across Russia. Which cities, by the way? That's very important. Which cities? It's also very important. Who's the one protesting? They're protesting in Moscow. There may be thousands of people in Moscow that are protesting right now. You know what? Could be. Could be thousands of people in Moscow and far less people in, I don't know, maybe in Novgorod. There's maybe less people because they're not a city of 2 million people. But here's the thing I always wonder about that. Because they're saying, well, there are so many people who are protesting. Yes, they are. There are so many people who are protesting. How many of them are Ukrainians? See, they want you to believe that Russia's in trouble, that there is some kind of massive outbreak. But every time they show a photo, other than the one photo I'm showing you, there's always one individual, just one person that's standing out. There's a handful of people in the background. There's almost no signs of any kind of protest when you look at this. When you look at the images, there's almost nobody who's protesting in these images, which again goes to 32 people, 320 people at a protest, 32 being arrested. But there's also 1.6, somewhere between 1.6 and 2.5 million Ukrainians in the Soviet Union at any given moment, based on the last estimates we had in 2014. So, but mind you, there are far, far more people in Russia at this time. Millions, hundreds of millions. But 2.5 million, let's assume it's 2.5, let's round it up, 3 million Ukrainians. Are they the only ones who are protesting? Because they're telling us that 1,700 people were arrested. And if that's correct, if that's correct, and let's say that there's 100 times more people than the 1,700 who got arrested. So let's assume that would be 170,000 people were protesting. Over 250,000 people protested in France alone on a weekly basis, protesting the pandemic. We have more people protesting the pandemic in multiple countries around the world than the number of people who are protesting in Russia. But we're supposed to take away the fact that there are anti-war protests from Ukrainians in Russia to make us think that Putin is somehow not in charge, that he is not, that he is less powerful than we think it is, that the Russian people somehow have this underground point of view. It doesn't exist. February 22nd, we said Biden says sanctions he has been threatening since December will start, but that was understood and ignored because the gains to Russia are more than the sanctions. So it's an empty threat. And when we say Nord Stream 2, that's been stopped. That hurts Europe more than it hurts Russia. Because Europe needs the oil. They need the gas. It hurts them. Russia sells the gas and oil to China. They sell it to Iran. They sell it to Turkey. They don't care. Everyone in the media keeps asking, why not sanction Putin if this was really serious? And people kept asking, why aren't we saying, if this was supposed to be the greatest sanctions ever, that this was supposed to be devastating, why aren't you sanctioning Vladimir Putin himself? Why is it that Joe Biden is saying, well, we're going to escalate the sanctions as it gets worse? What's worse than being invaded? What's worse than having your country at war? This doesn't make sense. Look, I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I'm not saying that I understand this perfectly. But I'm trying to make sense of this, and I can tell you, Putin doesn't seem to be paranoid, even though I'm getting many people who are telling me that that's a rumor that's going around right now, that France is trying to convince people that Vladimir Putin is somehow paranoid. He isn't. Not in any unreasonable manner, because everything he's done has a justification. Whether we agree with it or not is meaningless. And given that, that's just not realistic to say that he's paranoid, nor does it improve the position of NATO and Europe and the rest of the world. Biden is a disgrace. To a large extent, yes, because he empowered this. He encouraged this. And by his actions, he did nothing to stop this. I don't know. I'm trying to understand this, and perhaps I should end this by saying we have to look at this in a much broader sense than a minute and a half or 5 minutes on the nightly news given by a very biased group of individuals. CNN, MSNBC, we know they're biased. We know they have a bias for the Democrats, and we know that they're trying to protect them in the 2022 midterm elections. We know that Joe Biden needs to look strong after the absolute failure of the Afghanistan retreat, the rout that happened, that created the first terrorist nation, the Taliban. So he needs to look strong. He needs to have some strength. And so we have to question the news media in the United States and in NATO, because they have a certain agenda in their mind. Not that they're necessarily 100% wrong. Just like paranoia, you can be paranoid and still be right. The United States can be full of propaganda and they can still be right. But we have to understand more than just the latest headline. Putin isn't paranoid. There isn't any serious anti-war protest that's happening in Russia at this time. Those things aren't going to stop what's happening in Ukraine. It may make you feel better. It may make you feel like you're on the right side of history, but it doesn't make it better. Saying that there's no justification for what Vladimir Putin is doing is a lie, and it doesn't make it stop, and it doesn't make your position negotiating any better. Telling someone that they're a liar and then saying, do you want to make a deal? That doesn't work well. There's so much to the story, and we've been covering it for so long, and I know it's a lot for people to grasp. So let me summarize it like this. Vladimir Putin's going to try and take over the Ukraine, all of it. Because once you start a war, you try and get everything you can. When you end that war, you may not keep everything that you tried to capture. What he absolutely wants is the eastern portion of the Ukraine. But if he can get it all, he's going to try. He's been guaranteed that no one in NATO will take one step forward, not 1 foot of NATO soldiers, and in particular American soldiers, will take a step into the Ukraine to protect the Ukrainian people, nor to protect their own people. The United States is guaranteed that they will let Americans die rather than have one soldier put 1 foot on Ukrainian soil. That they won't fly a C-130 into the Ukraine to rescue American children. That's a fact. And then they'll set their sights possibly on Poland, probably Lithuania and Latvia. But the propaganda isn't going to stop them. Empty threats aren't going to stop them. Not having an international policy will not stop them. And trying to make Joe Biden look more like a leader than he is doesn't help. Because Vladimir Putin has already decided that Joe Biden's weak. Whether you think it's correct or not doesn't matter. Whether it's a trend on Twitter or not doesn't matter. He obviously does not value Joe Biden or Kamala Harris as strong leaders. He's not afraid of them. He doesn't believe that they have anything that they can do to stop him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be doing what he's doing now. In understanding the truth of the situation, we can understand true and real consequences. At least that's my goal. You may not agree. You may have other sources. We are happy to hear them. We are looking for more sources as we speak. We want to hear what you think about this. Do you think sanctions will stop Russia? Do you think that sanctions are more powerful than tanks and bullets? Do you think that Joe Biden has been a strong leader? That he's made a clear message? That he has an international policy that everyone understands and respects? Do you think that Iran or China or North Korea, that they will take action because of what they're seeing in Russia and the developments that have happened so far? What do you think? We look forward to seeing it in the comments and to see you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Thank you.